And audio. Okay. Can people hear
Make
us?
sure we are recording the audio.
We are recording the audio.
I give Peter shit for that because there's just like a year ago there was one episode that the audio did not get recorded.
Yeah.
Some shit
That
for
was
it
the
every
best.
episode.
That was the best episode. We proved
It was the episode
Fermat's
that
last
lives in
theorem.
legend.
We revealed.
Yeah, we solved
Who killed
world
JFK. Yeah, we did all kinds.
The
of
worst
shit.
part, it was only half the audio, so you could hear me talking, but you couldn't hear the other two talking. So it's like, it was basically just me talking to myself for an hour and a half. Anyway, let's check with the chat here. We got audio. Awesome. Well, folks can hear us then. I guess we'll get started. Welcome to MUME Talk. Today we've got a very special event where we are collaborating with some of our some developers from our sister mud or brethren mud. I don't know which one is, a male or female. Two Towers mud. So right off the bat, let's do some introductions for you guys. So first we've got Vildaran in here. Vildaran, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi. Great to be here.
And we got Lungathorin. I think I said that right.
Yeah, I don't even know, to be honest.
We learned that nobody knows how to pronounce their mud names. I have no idea. So, welcome.
And then as another guest, we're also going to have Jahara on here as well to kind of talk from the MUME development side of the house. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So right off the bat, do you guys mind giving a kind of brief introduction? Everyone on our side of the platform has heard kind of our stories, but just a brief introduction of like how long ago you started playing and kind of what got you into your mud, just real quick, like a minute.
Sure thing. I guess I can start. So I think I started playing back in '98. I was like 12 years old, and for whatever reason, I was on IRC and heard some people talking about this interesting Tolkien game, and I connected and proceeded to. I don't know how long I spent at level 1, but I eventually figured out how the damn game works. Been playing on and off since then. I think we all kind of have had like periods of inactivity, but yeah, it's been quite a while. I think I started coding the first time in like 2004, and I've played with that many times over the years. I think I might hold the record for like the most times aborting to code because I would never like stick around long enough. But yeah, that's me.
Awesome. That story is so similar to so many of our players, but Lungathor, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty similar story for me as well. I think I was 12, maybe 13, and it was 1999. But I actually got recruited by a friend. So he's not on the game anymore, but he was back in the day. And yeah, I started coding, I think the first time was like 2005. So like a year after Vildo, both in terms of starting the game and starting to code. But I've also been off and on. And now I'm coding with Vildo for, I don't know, 2 years or so, this stint.
Yeah. What hooked you guys? Like, what was it in the 90s that was just like magical and has held on to you for 25 years? What was it?
Oh, the start for me was the Axis, because you didn't need some heavy internet, you didn't need a heavy duty computer or anything like that. So once you got into it and you could navigate your way around, which was rough at 12, 13 years of age, it was easy enough then, to actually get to somewhere where you could play, because you didn't have to be on a powerful computer or anything like that. And back in those days, I didn't have powerful computers or even a computer. I don't even remember. I think I played in school a lot.
Right on. What about you, Vildo?
I think for me it might have just kind of been luck, right? Like I got into it and played it for long enough that I eventually started meeting people, and then I'd say at that point it was about like the people that played. Like I had several good friends that, I still talk to quite a few of them actually, and they are a part of what kept me coming back.
Awesome. So the community.
Yeah, for sure. And at this point, like I've met, I don't know how many. I think this is a pretty common story for a lot of the mudders. It's like I've met a lot of these people in real life and had a really good time, and we proceed to geek out a bunch on random Tolkien crap. Yeah, it's definitely the people, I think.
Yeah, it's exactly how it is over here as well for the most part. We actually, the podcast host Taryn, Slaya, and Dent, we also we just had a meetup a couple months ago. We went to went to New York and nerded out on some Lord of the Rings stuff.
We saw the Tolkien Orchestra live at Madison Square Garden.
And it just goes back to your point of like how important community is in like coming back to these games.
How do your significant others handle it? I don't know. I get in a room with somebody else, and my wife just kind of is like, they're doing this again, and runs away.
For my wife, it's kind of like my cute nerd shit that I do. You know, like she kind of teases me about it. But when I first told her we were starting the podcast, I think she like thought it was hilarious. And then I remember we went to a few weeks later, we went to the farmer's market. And I was like rushing to get all of the stuff because I had to be back for the podcast. And she was like, "Why do you?" And I was like, "We have a special guest. We're interviewing on the pod." And this is like completely hilarious to her. It was like me and announcing that I was going to start a rock band. And she was just like laughing her ass off at the farmer's market. But yeah, for me, it's just kind of my cute nerd geek thing that I do that she kind of thinks is adorable and mocks constantly. But
I'm kind of lucky. My girlfriend plays Muds. She doesn't play MUME or Two Towers much. She plays other Muds, but she kind of gets it. And I mean, I would say though, for people who they have a spouse or significant other that it's like it could be worse. I'm not going out to bars and boozing till 2 a.m. and whatever. Like I'm just like here in the bedroom frantically playing and getting really sad when I get killed.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Jahara, what about you, man? How does your wife? What's your spouse's partner's perspective?
Yeah. She thinks it's similar to you, actually. She thinks it's hilarious and also kind of cute. But at the same time, she also likes to like brag to her friends that I have like an internet fan club. And, yeah,
you do. We are all members of the Jahara
You
fan
do.
club.
You're huge online. You do.
Yeah, so I like to say like, yeah, I've got like a really active, about 300 active players that really like hanging out with me online, which is yeah, I guess it's fun a little bit for at parties. You can talk about that, but yeah, I keep it pretty quiet. Just I think it sounds like everyone here kind of keeps this hobby a little bit quiet.
Well,
yeah, it ends up coming up in my work a fair bit. Just I work in like a tech sort of job, and so like a lot of the people there have played Muds at some point in time, and like it's come up in my like job interviews a fair bit. And
Wow.
Whoa.
Have you ever used it on a resume?
In a good way.
Same here.
I have, yeah, actually. Because like what I'm in, having some programming experience, even if it's like hobbyist sort of stuff, looks really good. And so, yeah, I put it on there.
I knew a guy on the Builder Academy, which is another like a circle med based thing, who he was like, "Oh yeah, their scripting language is called DG scripts." And it's like, "Oh yeah, I put DG scripts on my resume." I'm like, "Did you have to explain what that was?" And it's like, "No, but it looked good."
Yeah, it's interesting.
So anyway, now that we got some of the intros out of the way, let's dig into some of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today.
Could they just maybe intro the Mud? I
Yeah,
don't know
so
much about it.
that's
Like, maybe
exactly
just
where
talk
we're
to-
gonna. That's
yeah.
exactly where we're
Yeah.
gonna start here. So, first off, could you two give us kind of a brief overview of what T2T is all about?
Yeah, so the Two Towers, our Mud takes place essentially the same day and time. It's March 15th, 3019, the third age. So it is essentially the same day playing out over the course of 2 hours. And it does that for,
My mind is already completely blown. Wow. Yeah.
well, a lot of the things in the game are designed to like happen, at sunrise or at evening. Different things are kind of scripted to happen like that.
Like
and much of that,
a 2 hour kind of like schedule, so to speak. Wow.
yeah. So 24-hour day over 2 hours, and it's one of the days from the Two Towers. Obviously, that's where the name's from. But it'll keep doing that, and then for about 4 days, 4.5 days, at which point the game will reboot, and essentially every piece of equipment is wiped, and everybody kind of starts fresh. You keep all your character stats, you keep the gold that you have in your bank, you keep like some auto loading items that you have, but there's this like rush to go and grab like the powerful unique weapons and like fill up your guild hall with equipment and that sort of thing. And so I'd say that's a big part of like what the staying power is in our game. Like you can kind of go through that cycle where I would say the reboot is one of the most fun points for our players. And yeah.
So do your character, like your character persists, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
okay, but does any of your gear persist, or you start naked every 2 hours?
No, not every 2 hours. It's every 4.5 days or so the game
Oh,
reboot. And
I
like way
see.
back in the
Okay.
day, that was like a technical constraint, right? Like there was only so much resources on the server hosting things, and so every now and then it just needed to reboot so that things didn't go terribly. Don't have to do that anymore, but it's kind of baked into like the game and what it is. But yeah. There's a lot that I could get into there.
Well,
Tell us about the community. Like,
Yeah,
is it like
so
a few hundred people.
yeah, what's your current player base kind of looking like?
When we were talking previously, I think the size is somewhat similar. I would say like early hours in the morning, we'd only have a handful of people, maybe like 4 to 6 or something like that. In the middle of the day, it'll pop up to like 30, maybe 40 sometimes, and in between that, it'll like fluctuate. Pretty heavy U.S. player base, though I will say we have a ton of people that are not in the U.S. Um, Definitely over the years, a ton of like non-American players, which is kind of awesome. But yeah, and then in terms of like I don't know, typists, I guess we would refer to them as. Like I actually don't have a good feel for how many that we have, but most of our player base has been around for quite a while. Like
A lot of experienced players just get returning, kind of a thing.
yeah. You'll occasionally get them returning. We don't get a lot of new players, and that's something that I think that's true for all of us.
We can relate.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you said is about the players returning because of the reboot every 4.5 real live daytime. When the game resets, that's probably the biggest event that happens outside of like these annual events that we host.
Oh, so you guys
gotta do this rush.
You guys host annual like.
Oh yeah, various kinds.
Like what is it like?
So
a quest or like a harvest? What was a harvest?
So no, like we have our sorry, I don't want to step on your toes here, Vilda. We have these like annual events where it's the T2T anniversary event, which we tend to have a ton of players come back for.
Okay.
They tend to. So I think secretly some of them just come back to collect this autoloading badge that you get to see I've been to that event, and then they have like a huge collection of those. No, we do others. There's the Harvest Festival. It's starting like in a month, something like that.
Yeah, it's the month of October.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have these like running things that we also do, and that attracts some players, I'd say, but it's kind of a recurring thing where there's something new every year, and that's also fun, I think, to come back to.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, so you have the sense that if you did not do those things, there's a certain segment of the player base that you probably would have faded away by now.
Yeah, well, I think there are some players that specifically log on for that. Like, the big one we just call the event, and it one of the largest and most intricate areas in the game is Minas Tirith, and that was coded over 20 years ago now, and it is essentially a celebration of when that finally launched. But it's turned into this crazy thing where each year like more things are added, and it all doesn't have to be necessarily like strictly thematic, and so you can get away with coding like things that are just for fun, right? And so a lot of people will return during that time. It's like a week or so, and just meet up with people that used to play that maybe don't log in a ton, and so I'd say our best numbers are during that.
Awesome. Well, here, let's paint a little bit more of a picture of the mud here. So,
Sure.
first off, like what are the playable races? You know, what can you really like anything from Hobbit to Orc? Like what's the breakdown on that?
So we have kind of two factions. So there are the free races, and then there are the evil races. On the free side, you've got the Dunedain, the Lending, Dwarf, Edain, Earling, Hobbit, Sylvan, and Sindar. I think that's all of them. I'm actually looking at our help files right now. And then on the evil side, you've got Uruk High, so like kind of orcs, but the stronger ones. Variag, Numenorians, Haradrim, and Easterling.
Okay, gotcha. So we don't have Haradrim and Easterling, and a large part of that is the way that our map's set up. So our map goes from about Grey Havens north to about Fornost. I could pull up a map here and show you guys. And I'd like to know where your guys' map really covers. So we got the map here. I think this is this visible on screen? No, it's not yet. Let me switch to it. Oh, I think I need to.
Sounds like you might cover a bit more sort of south than east, because we kind of go from Grey Havens to Mirkwood, and the most northern place is Fornost, and then down to around where Rohan is.
Yeah, so this is a picture of our map. So over here we've got kind of the Blue Mountains and Grey Havens. Then it goes east here. We got Bree kind of in the center. That's kind of where the game originally started. It wraps over here to the east, goes all pretty much to Ingrove / a little bit of the Mirkwood Forest. It goes down south. We got some Lorien, and then we got a little tip of Rohan down here. But we haven't really expanded all the way to Mordor and Minas Tirith yet. So has your map? Does it cover all of Arda?
It is, well, I don't know about all of Arda, but it is a little bit bigger than this. And I would say we've got all of this. It goes further south past Rohan into Gondor, and then like southern Gondor. So and beyond that into like Harondor and near Harad. And from there you can essentially hop on a wagon, and it takes you to like the evil race starting zone, which is Far Harad, which I honestly I didn't play a bunch of the evil races. Maybe Lungerthan has played a little bit more, but yeah, that's a fairly large zone as well.
Gotcha.
And then there's Mordor as well, which is like a kind of like an arena area where you can kill whoever you want, and there are no repercussions.
So you mentioned arena area. So you've got limited PK in that. In other areas, you don't really have any player versus player fighting.
Yeah. So essentially, you have it's like a PvP flag that you can turn on or off. And you have to have yours on, and your target has to have it on to actually be able to kill each other. If you don't, then you just kind of like knock them unconscious, and maybe they drop a piece of gear or something. But they could also report you for that, and you have to pay like gold in fines. That wasn't always around. Like in years past, that didn't exist, and you used to just be able to kill people outright, and then you'd have to pay for it. But in Mordor, you can't report anything, and anybody can kill anybody, and so it's kind of this like high risk, high reward sort of area. So there's like good gear that comes from there, and people will they'll journey in for both the thrill, but also for the gear.
Gotcha. All right. Well, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Real quick, I'm intrigued. So it used to be that you could kill anybody, but you guys changed that. It sounded like, or
Yeah.
it evolved. I'd be curious. Like, was that like a community kind of motivated thing, or like an editorial decision, or what went into that?
A lot of this happened at a time when I was not actively playing, but like the way that I kind of theorize it happened is so we had kind of a relaunch of our evil races at one point, and at least at one point in time, it was completely fair game for either side to kill each other. Like if you managed to like gang up on somebody, you could kill them fairly quickly, and that level of PvP drove off quite a lot of people, and the backlash to that was to implement the system of trying to make PvP more like optional or like opt in, and so that's kind of how we ended up in where we're at today. I think some people still hate it. Like I to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the PvP like flag system, but that's just because I was pretty heavy into the PvP scene once upon a time.
Gotcha. Well, could Jahara and Mike, would you guys kind of mind giving a brief synopsis of kind of up to what they've covered, kind of the MUME equivalent, real quick, just so we can kind of their players who are tuned in can kind of get a sense of the key differences?
Yeah, I can. You know me, I always love talking. So one thing, I mean, what MUME's been around 30 years, and to me, if someone said, "What is the two, like, what are the two like strongest, most unique, distinct? What are the two special things about MUME?" Number one is the build quality is super, super high. And I don't mean like maybe build quality on T2T is like as even better. I don't know. I'm not, but just like in MUME, the room descriptions, there's like insanely there's like crazy scrutiny and crazy sort of peer review process to build out the zones. And so to me, when I discovered the game in the 90s, just the craftsmanship of like every little unit, every little kind of atomic unit of the game, I was always just so blown away by just the language and kind of the quality, the craft. So I really like. I think it's that like it's the world of Arda that keeps the world of Arda as crafted and MUME that keeps me coming back for 27, 28 years now, and just how much sort of depth it is and how much immersion that offers. And then the second thing, the second special crazy thing is MUME has insane PK. So similar to maybe how you guys used to be, anyone can kill anyone, anywhere. Of course, same siding faces massive, massive penalties. There's a justice system. So same siding is very rare. But white side versus dark side is a raging war basically every single day. And there's a lot of, and it's similar, I don't know, I'm similar to World of Warcraft in the sense that there's a lot of in-game, like geographical elements in-game that sort of shape and influence the war. So if you're all the way out at Grey Havens, there are a lot of friendly mobs, friendly NPCs that will protect the white side players, and so it is insanely high risk for an evil player to go all the way out there, and vice versa. It's insanely high risk for a white side player to go all the way to like Dol Guldur or something. But so in between there's a spectrum, and so you kind of navigate and you pick a battlefield and you chase back and forth, and the PK is just super balanced. I mean, there's plenty of complete lunatics, of which I would be a mediocre example, who have been obsessing about PK and fine tuning and min maxing and crafting and tweaking and adapting it. I mean, we frequently joke it takes like 10 solid years to even be like 10 real life years to even have a chance to even like be able to navigate and stay alive in MUME PK and actually have a chance. But and I would be curious, at some point I'd love to chat about with you guys. So what I kind of think, this is my speculation, what I kind of think is happening in MUME is we've got this diehard group of players who's been around 20 plus years who are insanely good, and it's kind of like a population kind of frozen in time almost, like a couple hundred people who keep playing this very obscure, very esoteric, but like well-crafted, well-balanced game. That's insanely skill dependent, and they're super good. And then we struggle to bring new players into that PK. Just it'd be like trying to start playing StarCraft and just only having platinum level opponents, kind of. And so then what to me is kind of the newer population is more on the PvE side, the questing, the adventuring, just having fun, exploring, and immersing yourself in the world of art. So we've kind of got like those two, to me, kind of those two distinct subpopulations evolving over the past 10 years or so. But I don't know. That's how I would maybe. I don't know, Jahara. What do you think? You override that, Jahara. Veto what I said. Correct it.
I maybe verified the. Yeah, okay, cool, it's working. Okay, I'm having some internet problems, so just bear with me while I try to figure this out. So I actually agree with everything that you said there. I think the only kind of thing that I would call out is that there's always been a very big push for Arda in MUME to be a open world and to be grounded in that you have to walk everywhere. You can't kind of hop on a cart. So there's always this big push to have it be as much, I guess, like you can be jumped at any position by a force from the other side. And there are all these kind of like rules where you then have to like just be aware of, okay, well, there's no PvP flag here. It's just the reality of me. So you have to always kind of prepare. So I would say MUME is very much kind of like how the open world games of like Skyrim and I guess like, okay, it's the other world. It escapes me these days, but yeah, it's more akin to that. And we've been very faithful to that kind of like a goal of keeping it there. So you don't really see too much instancing in MUME like what you see in other MMOs where you can kind of opt into PK. But I think PK has been one of the differentiators for MUME, why it's been able to stay relevant while a lot of other MUDs have come to the sidelines. But it is amusing how like we've seen this recent kind of like a resurge of interest in Tolkien with like the Rings of Power and even the Hobbit series, and like what we saw in the 2000s was like this huge like glowing growth around like players coming in, and we just haven't seen it again. So it goes to show that you have to still be different in some way as a product, and we're still trying to navigate within MUME of how do we be more different so that we are actually competitive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd be curious for the T2T guys, how, because I know, and don't like, please don't let this question come across the wrong way. One thing I know about a lot of the MUDs is they're very much almost like community. It's very much a social experience. And kind of in a way, it's like it's a lot of people log on maybe to chat and to be social. And I'm curious, where do you guys, because MUME is like hard as shit. We're like, even it doesn't matter how much. I've been 30 years and I still die all the time. I still make mistakes.
MUME is a social experiment more than an experiment.
Yeah. So I'd be curious, like, do you guys, when you guys are architecting and designing and building and evolving T2T, is it really like a hardcore kind of technical skill, fast reflexes, complex situation, fast decision making? Like, are you guys really focused on that, or is it more like do you have people who log in kind of just to hang out and who play that social role? Because I only ask because I know a lot of the other MUDs still going. I think it is sort of that there's just like people who log in to hang out and craft or maybe build or chat. I'd be curious, like, how do you guys kind of conceptualize T2T in that world?
Yeah, I think we get a little bit of both, to be honest. Like, there are definitely people that just kind of log in to, get that social side of things. Like, they are, say, maybe part of a guild, and they just like hanging out with their guildmates. There are others that are definitely the more like balls to the wall. Like, they would probably, PvP anywhere if it were an option. I have some specific players in mind. But one of the things that I've always noticed over the years are like people play this game for different reasons. Some people like to grind PvE stuff all the time, and like that is what is fun for them. I can't do that. Like, I absolutely hate it. But yeah, some people just want to I don't know, hang out. I don't know, Lungathan, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, this thing about making it difficult. I saw Elden Ring being mentioned in the comments here. It depends, I guess. Like, for me, I've been playing the game for 24 years. I think there probably isn't an area that I haven't mastered, and that goes for many of the players who have played the game for a very, very long time. But we have some content that's very dangerous. We have some content that's just content that real Care Bear on purpose, But we are developing one area right now, which is the depths of Moria. We already have Moria, but we're expanding on it, and there we're really going for like more dangerous kind of an area where there's high risk of dying and so on. So it's a real mix. But otherwise I'd second what you said.
Well, it certainly.
Do you have the Balrog?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No. I have to ask because that's like one of my favorite things. I love the Balrog.
I was like,
I
he's
probably
saying,
misheard the question. I probably misheard the question because I thought you asked if my name is a Balrog, because that it is.
No.
It's a thematic.
I said, does Two
Wow.
Tarisman have the Balrog?
Yeah, is there a Balrog in the game?
Oh, sorry.
No,
Oh.
no. So it takes place a little bit after like the epic scene when
in
Gandalf.
Two
Oh,
Towers.
okay. So the Balrogs
Oh.
died.
was-
I see.
Got
He
it.
was
Right,
there
yeah.
until recently. He is now vacated, and there's like chaos, and so, yeah.
I see.
Awesome.
But on the PvP side, like at least at this point in time, we've tried to keep it kind of opt in. And so like we have specific zones where like you can go and actually participate in PvP without repercussions, which that was one of the ways that we've been trying to get people that, say haven't been able to, do the PvP for 20 years. Like maybe they can get their feet wet and actually see what this is about and start like building up those skills. Because otherwise it's brutal trying to build that up when
Yeah.
you're new.
Yeah.
You-
It really.
if I had
is.
to kind of try to encapsulate the essence of MUME, it's almost the inverse of that. It just keeps getting harder and harder, and it's not. You just have to that brutality. Like we just keep getting our. It just the war just keeps getting more and more
Vicious.
more and more vicious.
Yeah.
I love the idea of arenas though, because then you get to test the skills and the game mechanics against each other like that. I love that idea.
We had a
Well, Vildo coded two things, if I can jump in on that. Vildo coded almost on his own. I guess you had a little help, but you made most of there's a battleground where it's evils versus free folks, basically. And that happens once per reboot. You can do that, so once every 4 or 5 real-life days. And we have for events, we pull out this thing that Vildo made that's called the Crypt, which is like Battle Royale. You just go in, you have nothing on you, you pick up things and be the last man standing. And I think that kind of scratches the itch for many players as well.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So it was always trying to recapture like the glory days of PvP and like that feeling, and because like when I came back most recently, it was just that it didn't exist anymore. Like it was just gone.
So we had a question from someone who couldn't post in the chat, but essentially, so when you guys implemented your PvP flag, what were the observed effects of that? Did that help with player base? Were old players coming back? Did it make people leave? What were some of the observed side effects?
Probably all of the above.
All
Like,
of the above.
Some players like hated it and left. I actually I think that might have been what caused one of my bouts of inactivity. Is just like, hey, I want a PvP and now I can't really, so I'm just like, I'm gonna go play WoW or something else. Other people like that didn't want to be doing PvP, I think it really helped them.
But
Because,
grand,
like-
so like was it a net gain or net loss?
I don't know if I can say
Difficult to
that with any
say.
confidence.
Yeah, tough. Same thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like the player base is like for us, everyone's so obsessed. You run hot, cold kind of by nature anyway. You obsess for months, then you quit, and then no one sees you for 5 years, and you come back and you play 6 hours a day. I'm sure it's probably similar for you guys. So it's kind of, and then with when you got like you're dealing with like tens of people or maybe 100, 150, 200 players, it's kind of difficult to get like a real clear like statistical, conclusion.
Well, I think it's
of
also
what-
just been like a declining amount of players
Exactly.
over time.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
it's
same
like
thing, same thing.
it's hard to say if that is like one of these things that happened or if it's just it's kind of like a dying genre.
That
I don't know.
so that brings up a.
But I think,
Go ahead.
yeah, no, I do think, just like Bildo, I was also a PvPer, and I think one of the things that caused me to leave for some time, and I tend to always come back like many of us do, but it was the same, that we changed this, that we kind of made it a little bit more Care Bear and less PvP oriented. But we've had through the years players who their only reason for logging on was to kill other players, and they would do it anywhere at any time, wherever they could, and that deters some players as well. So I think at the time when the decision was made, we were probably quite heavy on that, and there was a lot of poor behavior coming out of it. And I think it's probably, this is just a feeling I have, it's probably been for the better of the game. But it's really hard to say.
You're gonna have some serious blowback on that from the MUME community.
Yeah.
It's like imagine half of your player base was not the hardcore like PvP type, and the people that were the hardcore PvP type can just sit there and bash on them like endlessly without like real.
That sounds exactly
That's-
like
that's-
you guys
yeah,
been
that
playing
sounds
MUME.
exactly
yeah,
what
and
it's-
even
Yeah, I was gonna
sounds like
say,
you've been
like,
playing MUME. If that's kind of the mentality you have, yeah. No,
I'm one of the PvP people or PvE people. I don't really PK, so I mean, to me, it's like, but it is what it is. I mean, I don't think Mume's going to change, but like, that's basically his Mume. Like, there are two factions. There are people who really love, and I'd say it's about 50-50, like probably in the population. And there are people that they really love PK, and they can't understand why on earth you don't want to play the game that they want you to play it, the way they want you to play it. And there are people that PvE, and they're like, I don't understand why these people can't play the game the way I want to play it. Like, there's that kind of back and forth.
What's the loss for the player that dies if someone's
Oh,
killed?
there we go. Yeah,
for
I should have mentioned that in my little overview. Yeah,
Oh.
so you die, your corpse is there. It's all accessible, so it is entirely up to the people who kill you, or possibly any scavengers, any vultures wandering by, or perhaps any
All your equipment's on the
same-siders.
corpse. Yeah.
Yeah, like they can just grab everything.
And on top of
So that leads to some crazy thing. Oh yeah, on top of that, you also lose XP as well. But so that leads to some really crazy. First of all, there's like an attempt at like this kind of like honor-based system where people are like, oh, I won't loot more than I need, and I hope you don't loot, or which is like ends up being just like a farm for hypocrisy and outrage. Just I never loot. Oh, you looted me yesterday. No, well, that was a special situation. That happens. And then the second thing I think is that you'll log in and someone will say, hey, can you come help me do this? You're like, yeah, sure, no big deal. And you go help them. You get jumped while you get jumped, you get trapped. Somebody like casts block door spell behind you. You get trapped in like a tower or a dungeon. You die and you lose all your stuff. And like depending on the design of your character, or how like some characters are insanely equipment dependent, some are not. So it's like very, very common in MUME to just like randomly like poof, done, everything gone, like months worth of grinding and trading and killing super mobs, super enemies, like months worth of work to really develop and min max this elite set, and it just goes poof like nothing. Which sort of like, and then people rage quit and people rage retire and post insane screeds online. And that gets into the mental health part of the discussion. But so the reality of it though is that MUME is just like, it's like a white knuckle game all the time. Like I'll be sitting there kind of half watching like Simpsons reruns, drinking a beer, and I'll look down and I'll see the color scheme of enemies, I see the particular text color, the highlighting that indicates enemies, and I'm like, what like just suddenly all of a sudden enemies come out of nowhere, and that adrenaline rush is just crazy. Like no, I mean, even like I've done like dangerous surfing, dangerous climbing, very rarely in my life in anything have I had just like the constant adrenaline surge, which is ludicrous, but it's like fun, that's why it's kind of the reason why I'll keep going back to it. But yeah, so PK, it's just total Wild West on looting and on kind of, I guess, penalty as a consequence of looting for PK, which drives the obsessive gambling addiction, win it all, lose it all type outrage.
Got it.
What about on Two Towers Mud? What happens when you die? Is the equipment left on the like what happens?
Yeah, well, so you lose all your equipment, but because our game, like the equipment resets every 4.5 days, like you can only lose so much in terms of equipment. You might feel bad because like, hey, you lost a really nice unique weapon or something that your guild had, but that next reboot you can get it back or something. But you also lose character stats, and that ends up costing gold, and you also have to gain experience to get levels. So like you can end up going down a level after dying. It doesn't hurt as much when PvP as if you were killed in like PvE, but it's still somewhat significant.
Yeah, that's
It
very
used to be
similar to
way
MUME.
worse. It used to be way
Yeah.
worse.
Definitely a lot of parallels there. I'd actually like to pivot the conversation a little bit here because one thing that's really struck out, I think, for both of our MUDs is that we really struggle with gaining new players. PvP might be a significant part of that, but what is... Well, there are two things I really want to touch on. One is like just how the development side of the house works, but this one we'll get to that in a second. But specifically, so what is like how are you trying to get new players to play the game? Are you like, do you have a funnel? Like what is your strategy on that front?
I think the biggest thing that we've tried to do is have a pretty decent group of we call them newbie helpers, and they are there and like actively on the channels where like newbies are asking for help, like being able to answer those questions, like just having people around and like activity that goes a long way. It's not like a dead mud where like nobody's there. As far as like at one point we had tried active advertising and stuff like that. That doesn't work in the slightest.
Same thing here. Same thing for us. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say we're like terribly pushy about it. It's more like, hey, if you're looking for something new and you've logged on for the first time, like here's the newbie channel. You can ask for help. Like we tend to be pretty friendly and welcoming and try to like help people, understand what we're about. But like it has challenges, like the way that the equipment system works, right? Like that's really off-putting for some people. Though I would say it's one of the biggest things that has staying power for us. Like it's what a lot of people keep playing for. So I guess that maybe sums it up.
Do you have any data or stats, basically? So I created 2 characters, and I'm actually going to create a new one right here, just so you guys can see the process for you guys. Just call that a random name. Oh, I can't do that. We'll do the Hulk. Does that work? Yeah. Oh, bad choice. Okay.
Are you creating a MUME character?
No, I'm creating a 2 towers character. You guys can delete this character in a second.
They got some. Who's coding the spam mitigation? It's looking pretty good here. Yeah.
So we're just going to. You guys can delete this in a second if you'd like, or I won't play it again. But password would be whatever. But I just kind of wanted to show you guys what the process of creating a character looks like for 2 Towers mode, because it's a lot shorter than it is in MUME, which I thought was really interesting. So you get to this point, you put in your information, you got your character name, and then you go to, are you new to 2 Towers? Yes. Okay, I want to be male. And then you can create your character by typing create. You can choose, let's say I'm going to be good, so freedom, and I want to be a Dunedain.
Excellent choice.
Oh, choose Dunedain, right? Is that Dunedain?
That tends to be the race that I choose.
And then it says to enter Arda, you just type mud. So you type it, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in. That's it. You don't choose your class, you don't choose stats, you don't choose it. You just, I want to be this race with this name, and you're into the game. One thing that we've kind of
actually start as a civilian, and you have to choose your class, or we call them professions, and you can change that over time. It's like, hey, you want to be a warrior now, but maybe that changes, and you can go be a ranger instead. It just costs gold.
Isidore tells you, I'm going to murder you as soon as you.
Do you have any?
I'll be honest. A tell like that makes me want to play the game. I'm just saying. Let's just say that seems dynamic. I'm excited now.
So if you create, say, like a warrior or whatever, do you? You said you can kind of change your profession. Is there the ability to kind of create what we might call a combo character? Like you can maybe you want to be mostly warrior, but maybe you want to be able to steal and be a warrior or something.
So each profession has 4 skills that are like what make up their profession, and like it's what the abilities are based on, and like the perks of that profession. You can also train up what we call other skills, and you get 4 of those as well. The normal profession ones, like if you're max level, you can train them to 100. The other skills, the max level is 60, and so you can kind of subclass that way. The other skills will also degrade over time, and so they go down like 1 point per hour, and you have to spend gold to keep those up if you want to like be that sub profession or whatever.
Well, so one thing I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to know if you had any stats on this, is we have a huge drop off when people are when newbies are logging into MUME. We'll have a huge drop off between like that initial creation and then honestly, like level 4, level 5. And a large part of that is because there are a ton of things that you need to do between there. Like you have to figure out movement, you have to figure out combat, you have to figure out your class, you have to figure out where you're going, you have to figure out how to kill things. There's a lot to take in there. Originally, we didn't have a tutorial. We added in kind of a little tutorial. Yours is much, much longer. One thing we struggle with, though, is a lot of people will lose interest kind of halfway through that. It seems like the simpler you can make it, this is what it appears to us. The simpler and more streamlined you can make that funnel, where between instead of giving them a real open world environment, giving them a path seems to have better results for us for retaining players past one session. What has been your experience in do you have a kind of a storyline that you start off with, and kind of, because when I created a character for you guys, it seemed like you go through a little tutorial and then you're kind of let out into the open world. You're given some of the basics, and then it's just you're on your own. What have you guys experienced on that side? What are some of the things you're trying to do?
So there are definitely some similarities. We'll often get somebody that won't even make it out of the tutorial.
Mm-hmm.
Like they, for whatever reason, are just not interested, right? Like they will connect, they'll do a little bit, and they'll just disconnect. I'd say that's probably a majority of the new players that will connect for a first time. Beyond that, there isn't that much hand holding in terms of what you have to do, say between, I don't know, level 1 and level 5. We have a series of level quests. So before you can actually get to level 5, you have to do a very specific quest that kind of ties in with some of the theme of where Arda is right now. But other than that, you're kind of just dropped into the world, and there's different ways. Essentially, you want to be getting gold and experience. You get experience by killing things. You get gold through a variety of methods. And once you do that, you can go to a trainer and level up. Trying to personally, I don't think the newbie experience is great for modern players.
No, it's terrible.
We are used to it. Well, we're used to it because we I don't know, we grew up with it, right? We're familiar with everything. It's not that painful for us, because the first time it was freaking painful. I was killing civilians in Belagost for hours before I got to level 2. And nowadays, players expect a little bit more. And so the outside of, we talked about a Moria project that we're working on. The other big project that has been mostly me working on it is in Belagost, and it's something that is intended to be more of a modern game experience, or newbie experience. And so there's an in-game map that is there as you're moving around, that helps you navigate. There are simple quests and things that are going to try to lead you through to give you an idea of hey, this is what the game is like, this is what you can expect through the rest of it. But to give newer players that option, and then once that's in, hey, if you're new, maybe direct them and funnel them to that, versus some of the more antiquated areas that are harder to navigate.
Okay. Here's let me just a personal comment. See, this is where I'm kind of torn, and I would love to learn from your guys' experience. Maybe we'll check in with you guys. So when I first tried MUME in, I think, '96, and I can still feel the glow of the CRT monitor. I can still remember it so clearly. It was beautiful.
Those were the days.
Yeah. I can't remember if I was doing 640 by 480, or maybe I had was it 10. What's the next one? 10 what by 768? Maybe
800 by 600 was.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know, but this was just.
And then it was 1020. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was listening to techno on Real Audio Player. These are just classic memories, right? But MUME, I somehow stumbled upon MUME. There was very little newbie experience, and it dumped me into the Grey Havens. And there's a pond there that has some fish and a pike. And I was just getting my ass kicked by this pike. But just the sheer atmosphere. The game was hard as shit, and I wander out of the town, and I don't have any food, I don't have any water, I go tired. I was just so difficult. But for me, just the atmosphere, just the quality, just feeling that incredibly rich Middle Earth vibe was so strong that sort of that just you know that just seduced and ensnared me forever. And now, 30 years later, here I am. So, but then at the time, I tried to get tons of my friends into it, and all failed. They all got frustrated by how difficult it was. Nobody stuck around. I think one friend got to level 11, but that was it. And so now, though, when I try other muds, and Mew, like tons of great people, I don't mean to take it away. Tons of people have done a ton of time improving, trying to capture the essence of Mew, but make it much more accessible. And tons of people have done great work. But now, when I go to other muds and I try out the experience, and it feels kind of cutesy, it feels kind. And I'm not talking about T2T. I haven't tried you guys, but it feels kind of cutesy. It feels kind of like you're on rails. It feels kind of like you're just button mashing. It feels a little bit too simple. And it just comes and goes. Like you ask me an hour later what happened, I don't even remember it. Like I don't know. So I'm torn on like whether a truly modern, super accessible, kind of in-game teach you how to play thing. I don't know. I feel like there's like anybody who's going to be successful and really activate and retain as a deep mud player, especially in like a very rich lore environment, like a very proper, sensitive lore environment, like Middle Earth, like Tolkien. Like I don't know. I'm honestly kind of torn on whether it's like make it really easy or just maximize immersion into the rich environment, even if it's hard as shit. Because the players who survive that are the ones who are gonna fall in love. I don't know. I'd be curious. What do you guys think about that?
I think there are some players that are going to respond well to that. Lost somebody. I think, like, trying to get players that are like young and actually new to like what a mud is. I don't know if that's happening like at all. Like maybe just I don't know the attention span of the youth or something. Like they come to expect something from modern gaming, and muds just aren't it.
But is that working? Because as far as I can tell, our growth funnel, there are very like the great work to make it more accessible. Still, I don't know if it's moving the needle. Which I mean, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I think it's people working hard,
like,
not, but it's
and
like
we're not there yet, right? Like I said, this was in development, right? And
yeah.
It's partly because like it's using some of the same systems in this other area that we're working on, and it's like, oh hey, I can spin something up here. But yeah, my theory is that it'll help at least some set of players, and I don't know.
I'm sure we'll do a check-in with you guys. I'd love to know how it goes. Because one of the few new players that we've had kind of activate in the past year or so, it's a cute story. He's a Dwarf Fortress player. He was on YouTube. Somehow one of our podcast videos got misclassified as Dwarf Fortress, and that's how he found it. But like he clearly was coming for a hardcore gaming experience if you're a diehard DF guy. So I don't know. So I'll be curious if you guys crack it. If you guys crack the problem on kind of modern accessible tutorial onboarding into a hyper lore, hyper rich Tolkien environment. That'll be a really awesome accomplishment. I'm sure we'll be eager to learn from you guys and share.
I think the problem.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that like part of it is just trying to help them figure out like how to play a mud, like solving a quest by going through and looking through like descriptions in a room and figure out, oh, I need some syntax to like move something around to solve something like that. I don't think that's intuitive for a lot of newer players, and so the goal is like as simple as that. And then when they get released into the main world, like that's what a bunch of quests are. Like they're little word puzzles where you're trying to like figure out what you need to do next and interact with NPCs and that sort of thing. Like so that part I feel is very immersive. Like some people get really into it. I don't personally. Like I just want to figure out how to do the quest and like blast through it as fast as I can. But some people respond really well to it.
I think one of the
there are some. Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention there are some interesting new technology developments with like large language models that maybe we just need to make it more easy for people to talk in plain text rather than, as you said, the the current interesting game of figuring out the deterministic word machine that is our input system.
So, I mean, one of the issues I think this is just with MUDs in general is for example, I think at the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned we're on IRC and you got introduced to this by someone on IRC. I still use IRC because I'm old person, but it's a bit like trying to get someone that's 14 to use IRC today. They're going to be like, well, I have TikTok or WhatsApp or whatever. Why would I want to use this thing? And it's more there's more technical knowledge, and people would say, well, why don't we have all these people trying to use IRC, even if IRC is a superior technology and all this other stuff? Well, it's just part of it is, and part of it you can improve is the aesthetics of it and the accessibility of the approachability of it, and the other part is simply there's a certain amount of users you have to have before you hit a critical mass where people will, think influencers. You have enough of people that play this thing to where there's other people that see, oh, look, these people are having fun, and I want to go have fun with them. Like, this is sort of in the early days of MUME, and I'm sure Two Towers and most other MUDs, you had lab groups in different high schools and colleges of people that would sit there and they would, play in the computer lab, whether they were supposed to or not. And that's, nowadays, and they would have lab games for graphical games too. And that's just something that it's still done, but it's not done as much. And I think that it's something is it better to try to adapt the MUD to suit this modern audience, or is it better to lean into the roots of, well, there's always going to be a need there's always going to be people that love these retro games, and lean into sort of the more, this is a retro game and this is cool. Because you look at something like Dwarf Fortress or whatever, they're doing really well. They're not suffering for players.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think they're like that. There's definitely some truth to that. Like, I think a lot of the current players, they'll just be logging on from work and like using the game as a little bit of procrastination or something to break up the monotony of their conference calls. And I actually think that's a decent market for finding new players. Personally, like bored tech workers.
MUDs, play them from work.
Guilty.
Yeah, and people that don't mind reading, that's the thing. It's like, my girlfriend has a 12-year-old, and it's like, well, he plays Minecraft, he plays all these things. I don't know how you would get a young person to play something that requires them to read, but there is possibly a market. I mean, you have something like Twine, right, which is for creating interactive fiction games in a web browser, and that got really popular. I don't know if it still is, but it was really popular for a while. But I mean, I think it's possible. It's just a question of how do you get people to be like, I want to log into this cool, game where there's all this expandability in your mind. You can, it's much more in depth in your imagination than anything a graphic could show you.
Yeah, for sure.
One area that makes, I think, MUDs, or at least MUME, weak in that area, and I don't know what it might be a little bit different for you guys, but our gameplay loop is, it makes it difficult to, A, play for short periods of time, and B, drop it instantly, if that makes sense. So our gameplay loop is realistically like 30 minutes minimum. You need 30 minutes to be able to log on, do your thing, kill some things, get some XP, and get some equipment or whatever. Like minimum.
I would say it's even longer.
Yeah,
than 30.
Oh, it's longer, man. Yeah, no.
For a normal
like
session,
an hour and a half. Hour and a half at least.
For a normal session, but like minimum, you need 30 minutes. And during that time, you can't just be like, you can't just walk away. You're kind of like Mike was saying earlier, you're kind of knuckles, white knuckling it the entire time. I assume your guys' loop is a little bit shorter since you don't have as much equipment issues as we do. But what is your gameplay loop like, actually? What would you say?
if you're in a guild, if I can jump in, if you're in a guild, you have a common armory. So since our game resets every 4 or so days, same thing happens if you log out. You lose your equipment unless you have like a place to store them. And there are a couple of such places, one of them being a guild's armory. So if you're in a guild, you jump on, someone else has acquired gear, or you acquired gear last time you were on, or whatever. You can just gear up real quick, go kill a couple of things, log off 2 minutes later. So you can do that if you want. Make some quick bucks.
You have a bit of a baking system.
Yeah, exactly. Or what many players do is you properly gear up. You get the best stuff you can possibly get. You run around with unique weapons and armors and so on, and you go kill very dangerous things or big things. Like we have Shelob in our game, and Shelob's lair, for example. So some players maybe venture in there, and that's not a 2-minute thing. You have to get in there. You have to do what you got to do, and Shelob's hunting you, and that's dangerous. You can't do that in 2 minutes. You got to white knuckle that. So there's a little bit of both, but you can definitely just pop on for a minute, or just stand there idle and chat and so on.
So an experienced player would still be able to get things done in a 10-minute session.
Yeah, but it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to gear up your character completely from scratch, then 10 minutes is going to be far insufficient. You're going to be needing a lot more time, probably several hours. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
but if you just want to earn some gold and you're a thief, like you can go around and rob some things in the 10-minute span and like make decent money. I've done that a lot as a mortal.
Yeah.
As far as equipment goes, do you have so we have the concept of we have a few things that are artifacts. So there's only one instance of this thing. So for example, you can go into Bill Burton Tom's cave and you can get Sting and Glandream and Orcrest, and there's only one of those, and they decay after a week. But do you have something similar to that where you might have a special item that only one exists in the game until your reboot?
Yeah, we refer to them as uniques, and they will similarly degrade, though the span is actually much faster. But you can, for at least most of them, you can like put them in a garbage can, and then the quest will reset. And so, if you were the one that quested it at the reboot, you kind of have control over it, right? So like if you destroy it, you kind of know you did that. You know the quest is going to reset, and so it's not common to then lose access to that. And so most of the major guilds will fight over the uniques every reboot.
Yep, can relate to that. So one question I had for specifically on the developmental side of the house, you've mentioned some like pretty substantial changes you've made to the game, such as adding in the PvP flags, and you had that Minas Tirith project from a long time ago. You were talking about and how you are able to add a lot more, not necessarily always old school thematic things that you can add in new things. You're working on a new player area, etc. What does your development process look like? Like who's making these decisions? Who's doing the coding? Can you give us a breakdown of what development looks like for your MUD?
Sure. Yeah. So for us, you essentially have somebody that is leading a project. So they are kind of the one that is coming up with like a README, essentially, like in any other project in like the tech space. That's going to outline like, hey, I'm gonna design this. These are going to be all the monsters. These are going to be all the objects. These are going to be the rewards. You'll probably talk to myself as the like our administration are called powers, and the role that I'm in is the power of production, and so I'm kind of heading up where we're going in terms of like a new game development. But if you have like an idea for a quest or something, you'll just like kind of talk to me about it, and then beyond that, you talk to these kind of two pillars in the development process. So one is theme. Like things need to be incredibly thematic. Like we are, I think it sounds like similar to you. Like we try to be very cohesive in the setting that we've chosen and keep like the quality of everything high. And I think that's a big part of what has kept people here. And then on the other side, you have game balance, and that the person in charge of that is going to make sure that you're not introducing some reward that is going to be completely imbalancing everything. It's going to be better than like anything that's out now, and like the quest is going to be super easy, right? So they have a feel for all of that, and so you get that approved by the two of them, and then you actually like start the development process. And once that is done, you might do it by yourself. You might get somebody to help out. We have a pretty extensive quality control process where like people are going to be reviewing your code. They're going to be reviewing all of the descriptions. They're going to be, telling you like things to change and all of that. It can actually be a bit much, but it has kept the quality high on like new content. Anything I'm missing, Lungerthan? Like, I think that was a good high level.
I think it's worth pointing out we have many waves of reviews. So there's like 6 things that has to be reviewed. You mentioned a few like theme, balance, and so on. But all of the coders, well, many of us anyway, have access to actually review. So there will be maybe Vildo does one set of reviews on that, and I'll do one, and then another coder will do one, and there'll be quite a few findings because there's so many sets of eyes looking at the code and the descriptions and making sure everything is kind of uniform to the rest of the game, but also just cleanly coded, not introducing new bugs to the game or anything like that. So it's a very rigorous process.
Could I ask what's the implementation? What language? What's kind of the code architecture?
Yeah, so T2T is an LP mud, so different game engine. It's like a simplified and very object-oriented version of C. I think you guys are on a DQ mud, and I don't know much at all about how those work. But
Just curious.
Yeah, I can talk a little about. So if you think about like the tree of like I guess who came first, I think Deku is like a little bit higher up on the branch, and then Circle is one of the derivatives of Deku. But then the MUME itself, right? It actually forked off really early off in the Deku kind of like tree. So it's almost been completely rewritten. Is very different than the Circle muds that a lot of people, a lot of different muds have I think standardized around using like the Circle mud architecture.
Yep. Yeah, that's similar for ours. Like the code base has been so heavily modified at this point that it's like kind of its own thing. Makes development real hard when you get like Google problems.
I know on MUME we have a custom language for scripting called Muddle that was developed primarily for MUME, and I guess you said you used LPC, but yeah, a lot of the Deku muds kind of have to have some sort of scripting language, and it usually is a custom, whether it's Muddle in our case or DG scripts or something else. So I mean that's what we use.
That's cool.
Could
Yeah, it's a.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like a love-hate relationship with like these custom languages and this like the stale kind of architecture. But yeah, like Muddle, it was invented I think before the term libmud or mudlib was kind of like standardized. But yeah, it's the architectures have kind of converged in a very similar kind of pattern. It's an interesting case of like convergent evolution in that sense. It would be nice if like even if you take a look even at the mud protocols that exist, like the telnet extensions and all that, like there's even so much like replication and convergent evolution among like similar standards. It's funny how unorganized and unstructured we are as a community, but yeah.
For sure. Over time, things have got more fragile too, because like this is how we're doing the development in game, but like the underlying game driver and all of that is written in C, and like last compiled with like GCC 4 many years ago, and like keeping it up to date is actually quite a massive challenge, to the point where like we have the way that things work right now, and we try our best not to break it because it's very, very fragile.
Yeah.
Do you kind of run that just in some sort of virtual machine, or how do you run it to keep all those dependencies?
Yeah, it's running on a virtual machine.
Yeah.
Okay.
We tried to just like, oh hey, if we just use completely modern GCC, like what does that do? Well, it turns out that it introduced like a crazy memory leak that like ruined the player experience for a little while. It's like, well shit, now we get to go revert and try to figure that out somewhere down the line.
Well, I can speak on personal experience that some of the largest operating systems in the world have also ended up in exactly that situation. Of one that starts with a W, I know firsthand was in that situation 15 years ago. So, but that's funny. Every engineer on the call knows exactly what that's like.
It's made for good conversations just talking about what a I don't know, clown fiesta it is to manage. But I'm hopeful that we can modernize at some point. But who knows?
Well,
It has been really cool with modern hardware. Some of the things that we've been able to do, because people used to have to be very constrained in what they were doing in the game, just because the CPUs all sucked and you couldn't do much with it. And I feel for our new development, that's been one of the most fun areas where it's oh, hey, I have all this computing power now, crazy things that I can do with that. And procedural generation stuff has been somewhere that I've leaned into pretty heavily, and it's been fun. Things that we couldn't have dreamed of way back in the day.
It's really amusing to hear, because we actually have a similar, really annoying inconvenience on MUME, where because we're still running on a virtual machine that hasn't been upgraded in a long time, we're artificially limited to 25 gigs of space. So there's all this stuff that we can do with compute and memory, but then there's this hard limit where the player base unfortunately also kind of runs into every now and then we run out of space and we have to roll back as we move some of the backups off. But the technical debt exists both in code and in processes. Before we hop on to the next thing, one of the things that we have is we have one dev that focuses purely on the game engine, and then we have other devs like myself that do a little bit more on the gameplay. But having identifying people that have particular things that they like has also helped a lot, just because it does make sure that we can kind of keep tacking away at the technical debt. So we're actually on a 64-bit a binary and all that. We're not still running in GCC4. So, but yeah, one of the nicest things that we recently did is we just updated our build architecture. So now we're not just using AutoConf. We can actually use CMake now. But it's a lot of work to do this that the player base doesn't really appreciate. But it makes dev life so much easier.
Yeah.
So
we don't have that. It's very much the best.
With we mentioned sort of telnet and the different protocols, and to sort of ask a technical question. So oh my goodness, if you're implementing any of the telnet protocols, that's I once went through all the different RFCs, and it's something 40 years worth of RFCs, and there's I don't even remember how many extensions of telnet. But what off the top of your head, what protocols do you support on Two Towers Mud for? Do you support MCCP or GMCP or what sort of things do you support for Mud clients?
Yeah, the only one of those that we support right now is called MXP.
Okay.
And I can't remember what that stands for.
Mud Extension Protocol.
Yeah, that's it.
Kind of XML based. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
It makes it.
We use it for click and play, basically. So you don't have to write always. You can click something to pick it up or wield it or attack it, and so on.
Yeah, but that's really the only one. We do support TLS, which is not seen on a lot of muds. I work in security, and so it's very.
It should be on more muds. I agree. So
99% of our player base isn't using it, but I'm really glad to not be blasting my password at the world when I'm logging on.
So is there what would be I know something that we had recently, and by recently I mean in the last 2 years. So I mean recently is relative, but we got support for transmitting out-of-bound data to clients over GMCP on MUME, which is something I've been wanting for years. And it's I think a lot of the devs, one of this is just something that someone had to sit down and work on it, and that takes time away from something else and all this other stuff. But what would be is there would that be something that the developers would maybe be open to, or at some point? Because I can tell you it's as someone I love tweaking my client and extending it, and I didn't say before, but I'm also blind, so I sort of have my own setup that because I can't like use Mudlet or anything because it's not accessible. So I have kind of my own setup with Much Client and everything else. And so GMCP definitely helps me grab data that otherwise I'd have to use very unreliable triggers to harvest stuff like my current hit points and when I receive XP and stuff like that. Like, is that something that they'd be open to, or is that not really in the ethos of Two Towers?
On ours, I think actually it's in a recent push as well. We started implementing like accessibility features. So like in a normal playing experience, like there might be something that is really not friendly to say blind players, but if you have essentially a setting that you've enabled, it gives you a much more friendly interface for that to like work with, say, a screen reader or something. And so we've tried to focus on that because we have a handful of blind players as well, and trying to make the experience for them not terrible has been I don't know, it feels good because we want people to be able to play games. As far as like your question around the other protocols, a solid maybe. Like I don't know what that would entail for us, and probably in a similar boat for you. Like we only have so many dev cycles, and so yeah, solid maybe, I guess.
Because it definitely changed. So originally, MUME still has its own XML mode, which it's just proprietary to MUME. It's not really duplicated anywhere else, but it's they implemented it in 2006, and there weren't really a lot of good competing protocols at the time. So that's why they did, and that's basically to give you XML tags around things like room names, room descriptions, combat prompts, stuff like that, and then initially sanctioning the use of things like mappers, which definitely changed the paradigm in playing, because then before that it was kind of, it wasn't really officially supported, and if you wanted to use a mapper, that was you had to find a way to trigger on the room name.
It was
stuff.
a Herculean regular expression task. Like,
but it was
stop me if you've heard that before, but like many things in the internet in the 90s and early 2000s, it was basically just like build a Tibetan monastery of regular expressions and try to somehow cobble that together. But and I think like it's sad that probably a lot of muds were trapped in that world and held back. But for MUME, migrating to something more structured and logical and having kind of an out of band channel to communicate a lot of game data is like been huge for us. Because one thing I can't believe in my earlier intro of the game I didn't mention is we have an amazing mapping client, a fully graphical exploratory mapping client that you can like immerse yourself in, and like kind of like is a second screen, is really cool. So, and are you showing it? Are you showing it, Slaya, on the screen?
Let me pull it up so it's a little bit more visual.
Yeah, we should right just show it. Yeah, so that's like nobody. Maybe like I would say less than 1% of the player base now plays without mapper, and it's like a huge part of it. Is there I think you mentioned in one of the newbie experiences on your Mud, there's a map to do like most players play with any kind of graphical map, or what's the?
No, new players do not.
Okay.
So if you are out on like the main grid, there's a map command that is kind of a simple ASCII map. Yeah, that will like show you what's nearby. The thing that I have implemented in this other area is like it shows as you're moving around, so it like helps you navigate.
I see.
It's essentially like at the top of your screen when you're moving around. So like
got it.
It'll have that, and then like a description, and then like what's in the room and stuff like that.
Got it.
I think a lot of power players, or players that have kind of exhausted the stuff, to like finding new things to do in the game, for sure has a mapper, and power players tend to. So depending on what client they use to log on, like our web client doesn't support it or it doesn't have it, but a lot of players have in their clients their own map that they've
like
devised.
a Mudlet. Is this like a Mudlet typically, or?
Oh, it's so many different.
So many
Mushclan,
different-
Mudlet, CMod.
1010
Oh,
even
okay.
has one.
Oh, I had no idea there was so many mappers.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I mean, but that was one of the things that like it before 2006 there were mappers for MUME, but it was certainly in 2003 it was kind of like, well, you kind of had to know someone, and it was like it and of course the power players had versions with a lot more features, and
Yep.
then post 2006 it kind of democratized it and anyone could use the mapper. But that also came with its own set of caveats, which is, I mean, because obviously I'm not looking at graphics, so I mean there's a caveat that like it really, the mapper becomes a part of the game, and so if you can't use the mapper or for whatever reason, there definitely is like Mike said, there's probably like 1% of the player base that's not using the mapper. So it becomes a necessary part of playing the game. So that's what I mean. There's pros and cons to that. So I mean that's why I was curious. That's why I specifically used the word ethos, if it was part of your overall, if it was something you were open to or not, because there's definitely pros and cons of it.
I'm actually a bit of a mapper hater. Like
Ooh, hot take.
Fun fact, the Jaharu who's on the call was one of the developers of Mapper, so you guys can fight it out now. Go for it.
Well, and I'm the opposite. I code next to Vildo, and I'm the opposite. I'm map lover. So we kind of, in the areas that we code in, we have to intentionally build it in a way that either this will be really bad for a mapper or this will be great if you have a mapper. We really have to consider that.
Yeah, there was something
That's awesome.
for PvP.
Yeah, we do the same.
That was taken away by mappers, in my opinion. But I can get into that if we want. But sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, actually, it's just amusing because we have the same kind of ethos when we're building, where there are areas that we design with mappers to be extremely friendly, and there are also areas that we design to be as unfriendly as possible. Just so that like it's more advantageous than to be jumped in that position, or like you can get lost or split the group up. So game design and mapper friendliness are hand in hand.
Yeah, for sure. Like back in the day for us is like you can get attacked by somebody, you can lead them out into the grid, and then we called it back hunting. But like you try to get them lost, and now you're gonna follow them around, and they have to like find their way back to town. And with a mapper, that was like instantly, if you have one, like I just press a button and now I can run back and I'm not in any danger. And I was really sad when we lost that because
Yeah, but here's an interesting, maybe a little counter anecdote. So MUME was developed mostly originally in the 90s in Europe. It's hosted in Europe, and there were tons of university lab groups. So labbing, I mean, I think the glory day, the 90s kind of, I don't know, golden era or silver era of the 90s kind of proto player base back then was very frequently in a lab. And many of the folks we've had on the podcast, like they learned of the game because someone in their lab was playing it and showed it to them or their friends. They were doing it kind of there. But a cool thing is that in these lab groups, people would map the world on pencil and paper, use LaTeX or some type of text, insane ancient, some type of like typesetting, very primitive graphical thing, to lay out massive, elaborate maps of the world, print those out, and then post them on the wall of their university computer lab in the 90s. So there was an element of people playing with offline analog graphical, but people, even like in 1996 or something, people were playing with analog maps of the world that they privately secretly had, and maybe nobody else did. It was like a total, like, not only was it like a hush hush thing, but like you literally had to be physically there in the lab, and it was all secret and everything. But
that's fun.
It's cool. It's there's a lot of kind of interesting lore to it. But I would argue, I think there's always been a mapper based imbalance and kind of bias to PK since the earliest days, I think. But different views.
Yeah.
Another interesting side effect of Mapper is that it's actually helped out a lot with development. It's easier now to plan zones and create new areas because you'll map it out in a the mapper first, so you've got a good visual understanding of what's going on in the zone, and then you build on top of that, which I think is a fairly recent development, but it's very helpful.
One thing that I want to call out that I've made a connection on as we've been kind of talking is that a lot of us started off as players and then we kind of became also coders on the side. And this kind of is like a slow progress of like, okay, I'm going to do some functions or aliases and now I'm maybe going to share my scripts with other folks. And now I'm going to work on like enhancing the game by working on Mapper or doing something else. So there's always been this fairly close-knit kind of community of like the players build the game and then the players become the developers and everything else. So it's almost as if like the whole point and ethos of like how we kind of develop these mods is to try to push the player to be as close as possible and also then contribute as much. So if you kind of think about how MUME has been doing development, we've been slowly getting to the point where we're trying to give more and more tools to the community in terms of GMCP to what Dan was talking about, or have like the XML that we had back in the 2000s. If you actually think about it, it's kind of akin to how some other games and genres have their kind of ethos. So like going back to like Skyrim, right? They always have like the creation kit that also gets co-shipped with the game, where you have this rich community of modders, and there's a whole like huge community that kind of builds up around the game. It actually enhances the game. So like it's important to kind of like curate your community by giving them tools to enhance and live in the game. I've even been amazed that like we have this like little side social community that's entirely built up to support MUME called Elven Runes, where people have even wrote fan fiction and posted it there. Like there's all this like stuff that isn't even game related that is just there to support the community just because like they just love it. They just want to live in it.
That's interesting. The first thing that comes to mind to me is like, how do you handle people trying to like create bots to play the game for them? Because like you give them that illegal information. Yeah, well, well, that doesn't mean people aren't going to, right?
Yeah. That's the that actually is another interesting kind of probably topic. Is that like part of the thing about MUME is that because we're such a PK heavy game, cheating of course is one of those elements. So like you can view mappers as cheating, right? Oh, you have this unfair advantage. Well, the same can be held true for like leaking information about where your opponent is to the other side. So there's always going to be an element of policing the game to make sure that like it's fair as possible. And it's the unglamorous side of being a game dev and manager of the game to have to kind of do that.
Yeah, for sure. Like spotting botters has been, I think, something that I've gotten better at over the years. But like when you give them a lot of that information, it makes it easier. In my opinion, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. We've dealt with some people in particular that just, they don't actually want to play the game. They just want to bot everything and, reap the rewards.
What I would maybe say is, so I'll use an example of a few months ago. So prior to the introduction of GMCP and the extension of it, I had been using a very complicated regular expression to extract all possible information from the prompt. And of course, the prompt is variable. It changes size even. If there's no information for this specific thing to display, it won't display it. So I would use this very complicated regular expression to extract that information into variables, so I could then have hotkeys to speak my current health using the screen reader, for example. And the problem is of course, the MUME devs, they fix one little thing silently, and they're not going to, it's not worthy of like a news post or something, and I'm only going to find out about it the next time I want to play the game, and I have to now like sit here and debug my scripts, figuring out what the hell they silently changed and update my regular expression. So for me, just the prompt information over GMCP meant that I could get my health, my mana, the room flags, whether I was currently climbing or swimming or whatever, get all that information populate it with variables in a format that will never change, that's guaranteed to not change. And for me, it was a huge deal, but they had to make a change. So our one of the developers who does a lot on the back end is Dane or Dine, depending on what your Tolkien expertise. They had it would send the hit point updates when your hit points changed. It would send when it went below a certain threshold. So, for example, if you went from healthy to, or if you went from fine to hurt, it would give you the numeric threshold value of that. But I was like, I told him, I'm like, I don't want any information. And this was something I had to sort of communicate very clearly, because he at first thought I was asking for special privileges. I said, no, I don't want any extra information. I want the same information that's in the prompt, but I want that over GMCP. And so he was very nice, and once he understood what I was asking, he implemented it, and I was then able to add this thing. And so now I can actually have sounds play automatically that change as my character heals or as I get hurt or wounded or whatever. My sounds automatically play based on that. And yeah, you could say, well, I could make a bot that would automatically, heal myself or whatever when it reached a certain threshold. But I mean, you could have still done that before. It's just that, that's no different. It's just for this task, it's just less it's less error prone. But I mean, yeah, that's the only thing I would say.
Yeah, you can absolutely make a bot no matter what. It's making it easier.
If there's text, it's like with piracy. If there's a headphone jack, you can record it.
Absolutely.
I was wondering if Jahara, you could give kind of a little insight into the way that MUME management works. In that it sounds like the Two Towers guys, they've kind of talked a lot about what they're developing in the future, and it sounds like it's a pretty open development environment. Is that accurate? And that you're just kind of I don't know, developing things out in the open, where it seems like on the MUME side of the house, we could explain kind of the development structure, kind of like they did, and then how development projects are taken and accepted and worked on and released, kind of a thing. Could you guys speak a little bit to that on both MUDs?
I can get started. Okay, so on the MUME side, we have a rich history of not broadcasting roadmaps, and I don't know where it started, but it's been something that we've been fighting pretty hard, I think, to kind of change up, just because it's really hard to also engage a community and a group of builders if you don't really know where you're going. Motivation is one of those things that kind of falls off to the sideline, because why should I join the God community and help build if I don't feel like I have any kind of say or what's going on, right? I have no visibility. So we are kind of a bit more transparent, but it's not just because you can just ask for it, we'll tell you. It's more of like we're busy. We're not gonna spend some time building roadmaps and presenting it. It's not what the devs like doing. We're kind of nerds. We don't have a lot of time already. So unfortunately, we tend to be a lot of okay, we only have so much cycles in the day. We're gonna try to do what we can, and naturally, most of the leadership kind of has a particular area of interest or focus. So my title in the game is I'm the ROTR users. Which means that I tend to focus then on stuff that impacts our users, impacts our growth a lot more. And I kind of self-navigate there and develop my own roadmap, just because I'm kind of like product manager and dev all in one. If we had more people, where people are actually doing dev work, I'm sure we'd be broadcasting roadmaps, kind of get more alignment and everything else. But that hasn't happened since the 2000s. So it's very much, I would say, a core group of around 6 people, where we do discuss roadmap, we do discuss kind of planning, and then we kind of a coordinated kind of okay, do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? Do we want to do sizing? So it's very loosely organized, but it's because we're not paid to work on this game. It's very much hey, are you interested in this? Or I'm going to volunteer to do this kind of a mindset.
It's also pretty democratic, right? Where you're saying because a lot of the errata are kind of this core group of people that you're talking about, correct? These kind of 6 folks or whatever.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
you don't want to leave anyone out, right?
Yeah. So we always try to like include each other in the mix. There's always like a desire to get their feedback. Like no, even you can imagine almost at your work office, right? Everyone here has coworkers. You don't want to like leave one of your team members out in the cold and then launch something or do something without including them in the project plan, or at least giving them a heads up and informing them what's going on. So a lot of it is that kind of a process of like, hey, we're going to try to do this. Any thoughts? And generally, you can kind of start to predict what your peers want, so that you don't have to kind of be blocked. You kind of design it for that. And yeah, it's very akin to a office kind of environment. So MUME is like my second office.
Don't make it sound like too much fun.
I think that's fairly similar to where we're at these days. Like, yeah, it's very democratic. Like anybody can propose potential changes. Like we meet regularly to talk about the different like projects that we have ongoing, to talk about like statuses, kind of like a stand-up sort of thing. But yeah, anybody can suggest a change and argue for it, and as long as they are willing to put in the effort to like see it through to completion, then like the world's your oyster. Or like find somebody that can, because like we actually have people that have zero, or not zero, but like very little coding experience that are still part of our development team, because like not all of the development is coding, like particularly in a text-based game. But if they can partner with somebody that has those chops, then fun things can happen.
Do you guys allow any player to join that core group, or is it a little bit access gated?
Anybody is allowed to join that hasn't cheated in the past. Like if you were a cheater, and that is a pretty big barrier to entry. But otherwise, yeah, anybody's free to apply.
And I think you were mentioning briefly beforehand that there's could you describe your kind of levels of decision making, like the Valor at the top, because you had an interesting tier, I think, where it was like it was players who were pretty low level, who had just started, but they wanted to help code, but they were allowed to add some contributions to the game. Could you explain a little bit your structure?
Yeah, so I mean, at the very top, like we have what essentially the Valar, which were the original founders of the game. Like they are by and large gone now. They are still the ones that like own the underlying architecture and like all of that, but they're completely hands off. Like they don't really log in or do anything. Below that, we have the powers, and they're like the active administration. I think there's 4 of us right now, and they each have specific roles. Like I think I mentioned mine was that I'm production, so like the new game development sort of stuff. So I am, I guess, the decision maker for that. Though like I don't often tell people no, right? Like if it's something that they want to do, like we can usually find a way to make it happen. And then there are a bunch of other roles for the other powers. Below that are overlords. Logarthan, for instance, is one of our overlords, and they are ones that have been around for a while and have a bit more of a like management sort of role within things. So like they'll be helping do the quality control for new content. They'll be like the balance and theme that I was talking about. Like those are both overlord positions, and so they're I think like a management level layer there. And then below that is the Mayar. And if you were to like first sign on to do some coding, that's where you would end up. And you can code new areas, you can propose new projects, all of that sort of thing. You're just not involved with a lot of the management of the game. Outside of all of that, we also have a group called the Makers, which are people that are really into like systems level coding, and a lot of people that like do coding in their day-to-day life. I'm one of those, Lunkerthin as well, and we have a handful of others, but they're like it's you can be an overlord and a maker, or a power and a maker. Like it's only some people want to be bothering with that sort of thing. But yeah, that's at a high level. Like I don't know, am I missing anything?
I think you nailed it. And we have a newbie period, but that's pretty much it.
Oh yeah, Yeah. When you're a new Einer, you take on a newbie project, and it mirrors what the development process is like, so you can kind of get a feel for that, make sure that like this is what you want to be doing, and yeah.
Gotcha. Hey, Jahar, could you compare and contrast a little bit on our side of that?
Yeah, let me understand this right. So the maker is just like another parallel kind of like progression to the I guess the powers progression chart.
It's completely separate, right? Like you can be a maker if you want, and you essentially take on like a maker project, which is like changing something significant within the game. So like, um, for instance, there's like a bunch of standard code involved in like the player object, and it might be taking something on there, versus like developing a new zone or anything. Like the coding needed for that, it just it ends up being a lot more complex for the maker sort of stuff.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So we have a similar kind of structure, but I would probably classify them into two main kind of categories. So then we have the um, primary one, I would say, is then like the core game kind of development and theme of. So we have a similar kind of like progression where there's Maiar and then there's Valar, and then we have like my group is I'm part of the RTR. We're basically the core leadership. You can think about them as like the executives that have final say, yes, no. The Valar are the equivalent, I think, of what you guys call the Overlords group. They're the ones that then like basically manage. They make sure quality is there. They take on build projects. They coordinate. They're like technical product manager or program manager kind of sort. And then below that, we have like the newly like active gods, which are the Mire, who are then kind of going through the training of what does good game design kind of look like? How do you build a zone? How do you design an object or a mobile fight? How do you design a quest? So they kind of work then with Valar to learn those different skill sets, and generally they kind of go through like a progression level of like, okay, first you learn this tier of skill, then you learn the next tier of skill, and so on and so forth. So Slaya here has actually gone through that progression, and he's built his own zone and quests and things like that. So it's a in fact, actually, we have an entire podcast about that where we talked about the building process. Before you become a Maiar, there's also an Astari quest that we require players go on to, which is kind of like a newbie helping adventure, but it's pretty stale. It was very, very popular back in, I think, the late 90s, and these days it's more of like a thing that you just do before you become a Maiar. So that is a building kind of enhancing the game track that individuals take on. And then I'll talk about now the orthogonal track that exists as well. So this one isn't as well built out, but it's basically our community kind of progression track. So what we have is we have many different aspects of the community in terms of like either open source projects like the web client or the mmapper project, which is our primary client to play the game. There's even elements then where you can just kind of join that and contribute. There's other kind of like random projects we also have where some other previous podcasters came on and they were using generative AI to create like an image client add-on for Mudlet where you can then view like rendered parts of the game using the text to images. So there's pretty cool stuff there. And there's another group of individuals also called the Rangers, which is they're kind of like the newbie helper group, but they're mortals, so they're not part of the gods. And what they do is they are in the game, they help newbies, and they're also inside our I guess the social community network of the game. So they're in our Discord channel. They help kind of curate the community, moderate it, and similarly, we also have like other kind of like social media sites where they're not officially part of that, but you can kind of view them as like a similar theme of group. So there, it's more like by the community for the community, and have like I wouldn't really call them levels, but like the individuals know who they are that like are participating and helping out the community or writing guides and everything else. So all of this is of course very welcome. And yeah, it's let me see, is there anything else that I should really mention? I'll let the killer host here ask some questions about.
No, I think that that hits most of it on the head. I always find it interesting just the way that the different different development structures kind of operate there. Um, we're probably gonna have to wrap up before too long here. I know we've already kept you guys like almost 100 minutes, 100 minutes, you know. But I before we break, wanted to kind of see if you guys had any more questions. Really, the whole purpose of this was kind of give a little bit of exposure to each one of a little insight into our kind of alternate universe muds, even though they're so similar but yet so different at the same time. And it's actually, I don't know, I personally found it fascinating, especially during the PK portion, where a lot of those changes that you guys have made on the T2T side of the house are proposals that have somewhat been posed in MUME, but we won't try it because we're like, well, we don't want to do this or that. But there's always that kind of like, well, what would have happened? And now we can kind of see it's you get to see what might have been, and maybe on both sides of the house. But then most importantly, I think we're all really here just trying to make the best muds that we can. And
Absolutely.
And it's really cool seeing how other people have tackled the same problems, and maybe hopefully we can get some ideas here. I know I got a couple ideas just going through your intro on things that didn't work that well, and then things that worked a lot better than I think that we should implement. But yeah, if you guys have any more questions, or the community has any questions, we got Same Linux here in chat asking, is MUME open source, or is there a place to help with development? MUME is not open source. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Jahara, right?
Correct. It is not open source. We're using the Decode license it's dual license, but there's like a closed source license and there's an open source license that just became available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're similarly closed source. Like it's actually a bit of a sore subject because we had people try to like steal the code base and splinter off in the past.
So I had a question about when you implement sort of new areas or new changes to game mechanics or anything like that. What's the process of testing those? Do you usually run like a test T2T mud? And if so, is it typically just the developers that test it, or do you open that up to the player base to test? Or is it just kind of like, I'm going to implement this thing and we'll just test it on the main server, and if it doesn't work, we'll roll back? Like, what's that like?
So we have 2 test mods right now. So one is it mirrors the current game very closely, and that's where we will stage like systems level changes. And most of those we will test on our own. So like essentially the way that it works is we'll like stage those there. We'll make sure everything's working as intended, and then we'll commit those to the main game. And if for whatever reason they didn't work, or like there were bugs, we could fix those after the fact. As far as like new area development goes, that's somewhere that we really involve players as well to do like actual playtesting. So there's an entire group of playtesters that will help us test like new content. But for like systems level stuff, they aren't as involved in that. But yeah, 2 test mods. One is close to like what current game is. The other one, we stood up to be able to like test potential changes without like interfering with that other test mod, if that makes sense.
We're also pretty active on the bug reports, because players report bugs, typos, ideas, comments, and stuff they find while they're playing the game. And if we've done any change of any kind, it'll be usually reported pretty quickly, and one of us will jump onto that and try to fix it so there's no impact to the players.
We definitely have a very active typo reporting community. They're always on the ball, always on the ball.
I'm always on there being like, you're missing an "an" in this.
Yeah, the players are great about finding some of that stuff.
Yeah, one thing that we've done is we're actually using spell checkers nowadays. It's amazing how technology can help in improving things.
Yeah, yeah. During our quality control process, if there are a bunch of like typos and such, you'll be getting some flack. It's like run a damn spell checker.
I was thinking about this just the other day because you have, and I guess this would apply to T2T as well. It's like, well, the database exists in a textual form. This is actually, I'm curious for both MUME and T2T. Do you run spell checkers just retroactively, like, hey, I'm going to point the spell checker at this directory with all the world files in it, and I mean, obviously, it's going to flag a bunch of Tolkien names, but has that ever been done?
Not for us, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think we've ever done that.
Yeah, I mean that that would break like 100 mappers. So like I think we first need to get room IDs like built out, and then we can do
that. Do we have any other questions from chat or anything before we wrap it up here a little bit?
I've got a question. I'm curious to what degree somebody briefly mentioned large language models earlier. Have you tried AI tools for any of your development stuff?
Yeah, I've actually done a couple quests where I asked the ChatGPT to actually co-write some of the quest text. So I told it you are role-playing as a orc. So for the players in game, if you do the what is that, Garuk, the half orc kind of quest that we added to the Barbarous Castle, the Necromancer area, that's 80% of that text there in that quest is written by ChatGPT, playing as that half orc, and
that's sick.
It's pretty cool what you can do with that in terms of efficiency. I have used a little bit to also kind of help write some zones. So the Lorien Tower fortress that we created recently, several of the rooms there are also ChatGPT code generated. So I found it to be kind of like an intern. You do have to kind of massage it a lot, but
absolutely, yeah.
it is really, really nice.
That's cool. Yeah, that sounds similar to, like, I don't think we have anything in game that's been using it yet, but for this event that we've got going on in October, like, I'm developing a quest, and most of the like descriptions for objects or rooms and stuff like that, I've been using ChatGPT for, and that's it's been interesting. Like, I think it's going to open up a lot of potential for development, because yeah, we're all doing this as volunteers, and we only have so many cycles.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably something we should pass to you guys as well about like how we've been using Midjourney to also do like generative AI image creation.
That's fun.
But yeah, it's been just amazing watching the community try it. So hopefully some of the Two Towers people are listening in and give it a shot too.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a rich area for stuff down the line.
Is there so I'm probably the only one in this group that has no coding experience. So you can tell me how dumb of a question this is. But what are Facebook released like some open source AI models that are pretty small in scale, right? What are the are there any long-term possibilities of using that to like role play as a chatbot for a mob or an NPC? So like you can have like a dynamic discussion with them, or is that something that's like way out there?
I think it's closer than you might think, but it would require like essentially creating an API to interact with something in real time. If we had enough time to do it, I think we could probably do that right now. Yeah. But I don't have enough time in my day to get that done.
Mm.
Yeah.
The technology is definitely there. You could do it today if you had the time and know-how. Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is actually like one of the areas where if we as a MUD community like work together and help standardize some stuff, it would be a lot easier for us to do these things, like just like how a lot of groups like the Circle MUD community has like their own kind of like core group. But because the MUD community is so fractured, we have so much technical debt, it's really hard to therefore have something where like a core group of devs can all work together. All of us have to kind of reinvent the wheel here. But the nice benefit of like having something like Llama 2 is that you could host it yourself, right? And then it's just a matter of like fine tuning it. So like, let's say that like a group of us devs work together. We're like, okay, we're going to take Llama 2, we're going to fine tune it, we're going to make it now like more of like a Tolkien-ish kind of like fine tuned for speech. You still need a bunch of label data, which I'm sure we have a ton of it in our collective kind of game databases that you can kind of use. But it's a monumental effort. Like that's probably going to take us like probably a year.
Yeah, sometimes I kind of wish that like, hey, I could get paid to just develop this stuff. I think I would consider quitting my day job to just focus on this full time. But yeah, it doesn't pay the bills, unfortunately.
That's hardcore, man. That's hardcore.
Well, I mean, it's problematic also with the Tolkien estate, right? So we have this common problem, whereas you can't get paid for it.
Yeah,
It's a very gray area. Yeah,
absolutely. Don't get big enough for them to come get you. Well, this has been a lot of fun.
Final last question for you. Actually, real quick. So, how does streaming work for you guys? Like, can you guys stream in your game? Is that normally fine?
Good question.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. We anybody that wants to, you might get stream sniped, and somebody knows where you're at, and they might try to come kill you. I've streamed a little bit on development stuff.
I think that'd be really cool. Streaming development. I think that'd be so interesting.
Yeah, you got a guy in chat that I think streams pretty regularly.
He streams some T2T.
But yeah, for the new development, it's been a fun way to like demo new features, because trying to like tell people about the new stuff that's coming, like something that I don't do or think about, and it's been a good avenue to do some of that, just to like firsthand, like, hey, this is what's coming down the pipe eventually, hopefully, when we get it through the door.
Mm-hmm. I asked that because I don't know about you guys, but I have a habit of getting stuck on YouTube on random videos all the time. And one of the things that happens a lot is I'll get stuck on a topic that I usually don't know that much about. Like someone's like coding something, like it doesn't really matter what, but they'll be coding some project, and I know nothing about coding, and I'll watch it like, oh, that's really interesting. And so I think it'd be really cool to see a stream of someone developing for a mud. Anyway, that didn't mean to take up time with that last question. We'll be wrapping it up here. Thank you so much for the T2T guys and Jahara for hopping on here. No one killed each other, so that was good. That's good. I appreciate that.
This has been excellent.
There was definitely when we first posted that we're going to do a collab event, there was definitely a little bit of like some. I've never seen the movers come together like that, you know. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys had fun and people found it interesting.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been fun.
Hopefully we can potentially get some of that, some maybe collaboration and development in the future. But yeah, with that, I guess we'll be signing off here.